Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video from Gone Legends. In today's video, we'll be highlighting American celebrities who passed away today, and in recent days, along with other notable individuals from around the world. Before we proceed, we kindly ask for your support. If you find these tributes meaningful, please take a moment to like this video. It truly means a lot to us. Thank you for being here. And now, let's begin. 1.
Blake Garrett. Blake Garrett passed away on February 8, 2026, at the age of 33 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In the days leading up to his death, he had reportedly been hospitalized after suffering intense pain and complications linked to shingles, medically known as herpes zoster. An official cause of death was still under review at the time, leaving behind a painful silence filled with unanswered questions and heartbreak. Born in 1992 in the United States, Blake Garrett entered the entertainment world at a young age, stepping into the spotlight as a child actor during a time when dreams seemed limitless and the future wide open. He became widely recognized for his role as Plug in the family film How to Eat Fried Worms, a performance that captured youthful rebellion, humor, and vulnerability. For many viewers, his face became part of their childhood memories, frozen in time on screen. But like many child actors, Blake's journey beyond fame was quiet and complex. As he grew older, he stepped away from Hollywood, choosing a more private life away from cameras and expectations. Friends and family later spoke about his efforts toward personal recovery, sobriety, and rebuilding a sense of peace beyond the roles he once played. Blake Garrett's story is not just one of early fame, but of a human being navigating life after applause fades. His passing serves as a reminder of how fragile life can be, especially for those who grow up under public attention. His legacy lives on in the memories of those who watched him, and in the deeper understanding that every performer is more than the character the world remembers.
2.
Garland Green. Garland Green passed away on February 9, 2006, at the age of 83. While no detailed medical cause of death was publicly disclosed, his passing marked the end of a powerful voice that once defined the emotional sound of American soul music. Born in 1942 in Mississippi, United States, Garland Green later moved to Chicago, a city alive with rhythm, struggle, and musical possibility. It was there that his voice found its purpose. Deep, expressive, and filled with longing, Garland's singing carried the weight of lived experience, transforming pain into melody. His rise came in the late 1960s when he released the iconic soul hit, Jealous Kind of Fella. The song climbed the charts and embedded itself into the cultural memory of an era defined by love, heartbreak, and honesty. Unlike many fleeting hits, Garland's music endured, sampled, and remembered decades later by new generations. Despite his success, Garland Green never chased superstardom. He remained grounded, continuing to perform, record, and share music long after the spotlight dimmed. His career was not built on excess but on sincerity. He sang like someone telling the truth, and audiences felt that. Garland Green's legacy lives in the emotion of his voice and the authenticity of his sound. He represented a time when music was raw, personal, and fearless. With his passing, the world didn't just lose a singer, it lost a feeling, a moment, and a voice that knew how to speak directly to the soul.
3.
Giancarlo Dettori. Giancarlo Dettori passed away on February 9, 2060 at the age of 93 in Milan, Italy. No specific cause of death was publicly announced, but his long life reflected decades of artistic devotion and cultural contribution. Born in 1932 in Italy, Giancarlo Dettori built a career rooted deeply in theater, film, and television. From the early days of his youth, he was drawn to performance, believing in acting not as fame, but as discipline and craft. He trained seriously, respecting the stage as a sacred space where truth could be explored through character. Over the years, Dettori appeared in numerous Italian productions, earning respect for his presence, restraint, and emotional intelligence. His performances were never exaggerated. Instead, they carried quiet strength, allowing audiences to lean in rather than be overwhelmed. He became known as an actor who served the story, not his ego. Beyond the screen, Dettori remained connected to the theater, where his love for live performance never faded. He worked across generations, adapting to change while preserving tradition. Younger actors often viewed him as a living archive of Italian performance history. Giancarlo Dettori's legacy is one of longevity, humility, and artistic integrity. He represented an era when acting was about commitment, patience, and respect for the audience. His passing closes a chapter of Italian cultural history, but his work continues to live on, quietly reminding the world that true artistry does not age, it endures.
4.
James Moschelow. James Moschelow passed away on February 2, 2006, at the age of 88 in Staten Island, New York. He died peacefully after health complications, closing the chapter on a life deeply tied to American music history. Born in 1937 in the United States, James Moschelow rose to fame during the golden age of doo-wop. He was associated with The Elegants, the group behind the timeless hit Little Star, a song that captured the innocence and romance of late 1950s America. Moschelow's voice became part of a generation's soundtrack. His music played at school dances, family gatherings, and late-night radio shows, offering warmth and nostalgia. Unlike many performers, his fame was shared, built on harmony, collaboration, and unity. After the peak of his career, James lived a quieter life, staying connected to music while focusing on family and personal fulfillment. He never chased reinvention. Instead, he embraced the era he helped define. James Moschelow's legacy lives in the echoes of harmony and memory. His songs continue to transport listeners back to a simpler time, where love felt endless and music felt pure. His passing reminds us that even when voices fall silent, the melodies they leave behind never truly fade.
5.
Fernando Esteso. Fernando Julián Esteso Alué, known to the world as Fernando Esteso, passed away on February 1, 2026, at the age of 80 in Valencia, Spain. He died at Hospital Universitario La Fe after suffering respiratory failure, following ongoing respiratory complications that ultimately weakened his body beyond recovery. Born in 1945 in Zaragoza, Spain, Fernando Esteso grew into one of the most recognizable comedic figures in Spanish entertainment. His rise came during a time when Spain was redefining its cultural identity, and Esteso's humor became a reflection of everyday life, bold, expressive, and unapologetically human. He possessed a rare gift, the ability to make audiences laugh while still revealing uncomfortable truths beneath the comedy. Esteso found massive success in Spanish cinema, particularly during the 1970s and 1980s, becoming a staple of popular film and television. His performances were physical, energetic, and deeply charismatic. He wasn't just acting jokes, he embodied them, turning humor into movement, voice, and presence. Generations grew up watching him, laughing with him, and seeing parts of themselves mirrored in his exaggerated yet familiar characters. Behind the laughter, Fernando Esteso was a dedicated professional who understood the responsibility of making people smile. Even as his health declined later in life, his cultural influence remained strong. He was remembered not only for his films but for the joy he brought during difficult times. Fernando Esteso leaves behind a legacy of laughter that refuses to fade. His work continues to echo through Spanish culture, reminding us that comedy, at its best, is a form of emotional survival.
6.
Ron Canoli. Ron Canoli passed away on February 3, 2006, at the age of 81 in Windermere, Florida. While no specific medical cause of death was publicly disclosed, his passing marked the end of a life devoted to worship, faith, and spiritual connection through music. Born in 1944 in the United States, Ron Canoli became one of the most influential figures in contemporary Christian worship music. From a young age, he understood music as more than sound. It was a bridge between the human heart and the divine. That belief shaped his entire career. Canoli rose to international recognition as a worship leader, whose songs filled churches, conferences, and arenas around the world. His voice carried warmth, sincerity, and joy, encouraging thousands to sing not as spectators but as participants. He helped transform worship into a collective experience, where music dissolved barriers and united people in shared belief. Albums such as Lift Him Up and God Is Able became foundational in modern worship culture, yet Ron Canoli never positioned himself as the center of attention. His leadership was marked by humility, always directing focus away from himself and toward faith, gratitude, and community. In his later years, he stepped back from public ministry, but his influence never left. Churches continued singing his songs long after he stopped leading them. That is the mark of a true spiritual artist. Ron Canoli's legacy lives in voices raised together, in quiet prayers, and in moments of hope. Even in silence, his music continues to speak.
7.
Ernest Morel. Ernest Morel passed away on February 4, 2006 at the age of 54 after a long and courageous battle with cancer. His death came far too early, leaving behind a deep sense of loss across education, scholarship, and cultural leadership. Born in 1971 in the United States, Ernest Morel dedicated his life to literacy, education, and empowering young voices. He believed that reading and writing were not just academic tools but pathways to justice, identity, and self-worth. That belief shaped his groundbreaking work as a scholar and educational leader. Morel became widely respected for his research in urban education and critical literacy. He worked with students who were often overlooked, teaching them that their stories mattered. His classrooms were spaces of dialogue, creativity, and courage. Beyond academia, he also served as a music executive, bridging art and education with rare vision. Throughout his career, Ernest Morel was known not just for intelligence but for compassion. He mentored countless students and educators, encouraging them to challenge systems and imagine better futures. Even as illness took its toll, he remained committed to his mission. Ernest Morel's work continues in the lives he shaped and the minds he awakened. He reminded the world that education is not about information, it is about transformation.
8.
Mickey Lalick. Mickey Lalick passed away on February 4, 2026 at the age of 85 in Sterling Heights, Michigan. He died peacefully while receiving hospice care, with no specific cause of death publicly announced. Born in 1940 in Portland, Oregon, Michael Stephen Lalick became one of the most respected pitchers in Major League Baseball history. His name is forever tied to the Detroit Tigers and to one of the most legendary performances in World Series history. Lalick rose through professional baseball with determination rather than glamour. He was known for endurance, grit, and a powerful left arm that never backed down from pressure. His defining moment came during the 1968 World Series, where he pitched 3 complete game victories, earning World Series MVP honors and securing his place in baseball history. Unlike flashier stars, Lalick represented reliability. He showed up, carried the weight, and delivered when it mattered most. Fans admired him not just for wins, but for heart. After retiring, Mickey Lalick lived a quieter life, staying connected to the game and the community that loved him. His legacy remains etched in baseball lore, a symbol of toughness, loyalty, and perseverance. Mickey Lalick's story reminds us that greatness is often built through consistency and courage. His name will forever echo in stadiums, statistics, and the memories of fans who watched history unfold one pitch at a time.
9.
Goldie Jean Hawn was born in 1945 in Washington, D.C., in a country celebrating victory after war, but inside her own young world, peace was fragile and uncertain. From the very beginning, her life carried a quiet tension, the kind that doesn't scream, but slowly presses against the heart. Her parents loved her, yet the home she grew up in was not free from pressure, expectations, and emotional weight. Even as a child, Goldie sensed that happiness was something that could disappear without warning. She learned early that smiles could be practiced, that laughter could be armor, and that inside joyful rooms, sadness could still exist. As she grew older, Goldie discovered dance not just as movement, but as escape. Ballet became her refuge, her hiding place from confusion and fear. When she danced, the world made sense. When the music played, the anxiety softened. But even this passion carried danger. The pressure to be perfect, the fear of failure, the silent question that haunted her young mind, what if I am not enough? Those fears did not fade with age. They grew. In her late teens and early 20s, while others imagined fame as freedom, Goldie felt it closing in like a storm. Her early attempts to break into entertainment were filled with rejection, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion. She was seen, yet not understood, watched, yet not protected. Hollywood, even then, was not kind to women who were young, vulnerable, and unsure of their own strength. Behind the bright lights, Goldie began to suffer from intense anxiety and panic attacks, moments where her heart raced uncontrollably, her breath disappeared, and fear flooded her body without warning. These were not small moments. These were terrifying episodes that made her believe she was losing control of her mind. Moments when her own thoughts became her enemy. She later spoke openly about these struggles, about how anxiety followed her even during success, how fame did not heal her pain, how applause could not quiet her fear. At a time when mental health was rarely discussed, Goldie suffered mostly alone, believing something was broken inside her. And yet, the world kept demanding a smile. Her early marriage brought its own heartbreak. Love, which she hoped would be safety, became another source of pain. Divorce came not just as a legal ending, but as an emotional collapse. Suddenly, she was a single mother, navigating fear, responsibility, and survival, all while the world expected her to remain charming and lighthearted on screen. Moments she questioned whether she could continue. Moments where the weight felt unbearable. Fame did not save her. Success did not protect her. Money did not silence her fear. What saved her was something far more fragile: awareness. What saved her was something far more fragile: awareness. What saved her was something far more fragile. As she studied, she questioned her thoughts. She learned to sit with fear instead of running from it. Meditation, mindfulness, and emotional understanding became her lifeline. Slowly, painfully, she learned that darkness did not mean weakness, it meant humanity. And from that darkness, something extraordinary began to form. Not a louder smile, not a fake joy, but a deeper strength. This is the part of Goldie Hawn's story the cameras rarely showed: the fear before the fame, the panic behind the laughter. And this was only the beginning. Goldie Hawn did not rise to fame gently. Her success arrived fast, loud, and unforgiving, pulling her into a world that offered applause on the surface and pressure underneath, a world where joy was expected even when the soul felt tired. When she finally broke through in the late 1960s, it felt almost unreal, as if life had suddenly shifted from quiet struggle into blinding light without warning. Television audiences first noticed her on the comedy sketch show, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, where her infectious laughter, playful innocence, and radiant presence made her instantly recognizable. To the world, she looked carefree, almost weightless, as if happiness came naturally to her. But behind that image, Goldie was fighting battles no one could see. The sudden fame magnified her anxiety. The panic attacks did not disappear. Instead, they followed her onto sets, into studios, into rooms filled with powerful people who expected confidence and ease. She was young, newly famous, and still learning who she was, while millions of strangers believed they already knew her. Every role came with expectations, every appearance came with pressure, and every smile felt like a responsibility. The industry labeled her as the happy girl, the funny blonde, placing her into a box that felt both flattering and suffocating. She worried constantly about being taken seriously, about being reduced to an image rather than seen as a human being. In 1969, her performance in Cactus Flower changed everything. The role earned her an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, a moment that should have felt like triumph, validation, and relief. Instead, it arrived with fear. Winning an Oscar so early in her career brought an unspoken question that haunted her thoughts: how do you live up to this? Success became something she had to defend rather than celebrate. The industry's love was conditional, and she sensed it. She knew that one wrong step, one failure, could turn admiration into dismissal. As her film career expanded through the 1970s, Goldie became one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. Movies like Butterflies Are Free, Shampoo, and Foul Play cemented her status as a leading actress with both comedic brilliance and emotional depth. Yet the more famous she became, the lonelier she sometimes felt. Fame isolated her, separating her from normal life, from privacy, from quiet moments where she could simply exist without judgment. She often questioned whether people loved her for who she was, or only for what she represented on screen. During this period, her personal life continued to reflect instability. Romantic relationships came and went, often strained by the demands of fame and the emotional toll of anxiety. Being a mother added another layer of complexity. Goldie loved her children deeply, but she carried the constant fear of failing them, of not being present enough, of passing her anxieties onto them. Balancing motherhood and stardom was not glamorous, it was exhausting. There were days she felt torn apart by guilt, days she wondered if she was strong enough to hold everything together. Despite her success, Goldie began to feel trapped by Hollywood's expectations of women, especially aging women. Even in her 30s, she sensed the industry's quiet countdown, the unspoken fear that youth would be taken away and opportunities would disappear. This fear was not imagined, it was real, structural, and cruel. She watched as roles became fewer, as women were judged more harshly than men, as worth was measured by appearance rather than experience. These realities forced her to confront another danger in her life, the fear of becoming invisible. Yet, instead of surrendering, Goldie chose evolution. She stepped away when she needed to, refusing to let the industry consume her entirely. She focused on her children, her mental health, and her inner life. This decision was not easy. Walking away from constant visibility meant risking relevance, risking momentum, risking everything she had built. But it was also an act of survival. Through meditation and self-reflection, Goldie began to reshape her relationship with fear. She did not eliminate anxiety, she learned to coexist with it. She stopped running from discomfort and started listening to it. This inner work slowly transformed her, giving her a deeper understanding of herself and others. It also changed the way she approached her career, allowing her to choose roles that reflected maturity, humor, and authenticity rather than obligation. By the late 1980s and 1990s, films like Overboard, Private Benjamin, and The First Monday in May showcased not just her comedic talent, but her control as a producer and creative force. She was no longer just the smiling actress. She was a woman shaping her own narrative, deciding when to speak and when to step back. Her long-term partnership with actor Kurt Russell became a symbol of stability, respect, and unconventional love in an industry known for broken promises. Their relationship, built on trust rather than tradition, reflected Goldie's refusal to live by anyone else's rules. This phase of her life was not free from hardship, but it carried wisdom. She learned that strength did not mean constant success, it meant knowing when to pause, knowing when to protect yourself, knowing when to say no. Goldie Hawn's rise was never just about fame, it was about survival within fame, about learning how to remain human in a world that often forgets humanity. And as time passed, something remarkable happened. The woman once terrified by her own thoughts became a voice for mental health awareness, compassion, and emotional honesty. She turned her pain into purpose, using her experiences to help others understand that fear does not make you weak, it makes you real. This was no longer just the story of a movie star. It was the story of a woman who faced darkness, climbed through light, and refused to disappear. As the years moved forward, Goldie Hawn entered a phase of life that few Hollywood figures ever reach with grace. The noise softened, the pressure shifted, the fear that once ruled her thoughts no longer defined her days. She did not become fearless, but she became grounded. She learned that strength was not about conquering anxiety, but about understanding it, honoring it, and refusing to let it steal her peace. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, Goldie chose something far more radical: acceptance. Living primarily in the United States, Goldie gradually stepped away from constant acting, not because she was forgotten, but because she chose presence over performance. She focused on family, on watching her children grow into their own identities, on becoming a steady emotional center rather than a distant icon. Her relationship with Kurt Russell continued to stand as one of Hollywood's rare examples of a lasting partnership without traditional constraints. They never married, yet their bond remained unshaken, built on mutual respect, laughter, and emotional honesty. In a world that often mistakes love for spectacle, theirs became a quiet lesson in commitment without ownership. Goldie's later work was no longer driven by ambition, but by intention. When she appeared on screen, it was because the story mattered, because the role reflected truth, growth, and humanity. Films like The Banger Sisters and her return in Snatched, alongside her real-life daughter Kate Hudson, showed a woman unafraid of aging, unafraid of humor rooted in imperfection, unafraid of being seen as real rather than ideal. She embraced wrinkles, vulnerability, and the wisdom that comes only from survival. But perhaps her greatest contribution during this chapter of her life came beyond cinema. Goldie founded the Hawn Foundation, dedicating herself to mental health education, mindfulness, and emotional resilience for children. This was not charity born from image, it was purpose born from lived pain. She understood what it meant to struggle silently as a young person, to feel overwhelmed by thoughts you cannot control, to believe something is wrong with you because no one taught you how the mind works. Through her foundation, she worked to give children the tools she never had: awareness, compassion, and emotional safety. She spoke openly about anxiety at a time when many still hid it. She challenged the stigma surrounding mental health, especially for women expected to remain pleasant and composed no matter the cost. Her voice carried weight because it was honest. She never claimed to have all the answers. She never presented herself as healed or perfect. Instead, she offered understanding. She reminded people that happiness is not a permanent state, but a practice. Goldie Hawn's legacy is not defined solely by awards, box office numbers, or iconic roles. It is defined by endurance, by the courage to remain soft in a world that rewards hardness, by the refusal to let fear erase joy. She showed generations of women that laughter does not mean a lack of depth, that beauty does not cancel intelligence, that vulnerability can coexist with strength. Today, Goldie Hawn remains alive, present, and influential, not as a symbol of eternal youth, but as proof that growth does not end with fame. Her story continues, not in headlines, but in quieter spaces in classrooms teaching mindfulness, in families learning emotional awareness, in individuals who finally feel seen because someone famous dared to admit she was afraid too. Her life reminds us that legends are not created by perfection. They are shaped by struggle, reflection, and the courage to keep going when no one is watching. Goldie Hawn did not just survive Hollywood. She redefined what it means to live within it without losing yourself. This is not the end of her story. It is the echo of a life still unfolding. As time continued to move forward, Goldie Hawn became something rare in the modern world of celebrity. She became a presence rather than a performance. She no longer needed constant visibility to remain relevant. Her influence lived quietly, steadily, like a warm light that never demands attention yet never fades. While newer generations chased fame at impossible speed, Goldie stood as a reminder that a life can be meaningful even when it slows down. There were long periods when she chose silence over the spotlight. To some, it looked like an absence, but in truth, it was an intention. Goldie understood something many never learn, that constant noise can drown the soul. She protected her inner world fiercely, choosing mornings of reflection over red carpets, choosing family dinners over premieres, choosing peace over approval. This choice was not a weakness, it was wisdom earned through years of emotional survival. Her children, Kate Hudson and Oliver Hudson, often spoke about her not as a star, but as a mother who valued emotional honesty above perfection. Goldie taught them that feelings are not enemies, that fear does not mean failure, and that success without self-understanding is hollow. In this way, her legacy extended beyond film into generations of lives shaped by her values. She did not raise children who feared vulnerability, she raised humans who understood it. As she aged, Goldie refused to wage war against time. She did not chase youth as an enemy to defeat. Instead, she treated aging as an ally, a teacher that strips away illusion and reveals truth. In interviews, she spoke openly about the pressure women face to remain desirable, the cruelty of ageism, and the deep exhaustion of pretending not to change. Her honesty gave others permission to breathe, to stop apologizing for growing older, to see beauty in evolution rather than resistance. She also became more philosophical, reflecting deeply on happiness, purpose, and mortality. Though she is still alive, Goldie has never avoided conversations about the end of life. She speaks of death not with fear, but with acceptance, believing that awareness of impermanence gives life greater meaning. This perspective came not from books alone, but from decades of anxiety, from moments when fear convinced her she might not survive her own thoughts. Having lived through those internal crises, she learned to respect life without clinging to it. In the public imagination, Goldie Hawn will always be associated with laughter. But those who truly understand her story know that her laughter was never shallow. It was hard-earned. It was a form of resistance. It was a choice she made again and again, even when fear whispered that darkness would win. She proved that joy is not the absence of pain, but the courage to carry it without letting it define you. Hollywood often celebrates reinvention, but Goldie's greatest achievement was consistency of character. She did not abandon herself to stay relevant. She did not betray her inner truths to maintain power. She evolved without erasing who she was. In a system that consumes people, she learned how to remain whole. When future generations look back on Goldie Hawn, they may first see the films, the awards, and the unforgettable smile. But beneath those images lives a deeper story. The story of a woman who faced anxiety before it was spoken about, who endured fame without letting it destroy her humanity, who chose mindfulness over madness, connection over consumption, and love over image. Her life reminds us that legends are not only those who conquer the world. Sometimes, legends are those who conquer themselves. Goldie Hawn's journey teaches us that survival can be graceful, that healing can be quiet, and that the most powerful stories are not always the loudest ones. And so, as the years continue and the world changes, her presence remains not as a frozen icon, but as a living lesson, a reminder that even in the brightest spotlight, it is possible to step back, breathe deeply, and choose a life rooted in truth. This is the enduring power of Goldie Hawn, not just a star, but a human being who learned how to live. As the decades stretched on, Goldie Hawn's presence began to feel less like that of a celebrity and more like that of a quiet teacher watching the world from a distance. She had nothing left to prove, yet everything left to offer. In a culture addicted to youth, speed, and constant reinvention, she represented something slower, deeper, and far more difficult to achieve: inner peace earned through experience. The girl who once feared her own heartbeat had grown into a woman who understood the rhythm of life itself. Goldie often spoke about happiness not as a destination, but as a discipline. This belief was shaped by her own suffering, by years when happiness felt unreachable, no matter how successful she became. She understood that joy does not arrive fully formed. It is built moment by moment through awareness, compassion, and acceptance. This philosophy guided not only her personal life, but her public mission. Through interviews, speeches, and her foundation's work, she shared the idea that mental health should not be hidden behind smiles or success. Her words reached people who had never felt seen before, people who believed their anxiety made them weak, people who thought their sadness disqualified them from joy. Culturally, Goldie Hawn helped redefine what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood. She refused to accept the narrow roles offered to women, both on and off screen. She was playful without being shallow, emotional without being fragile, beautiful without being silent. She showed that comedy could be intelligent, that femininity could be powerful, and that vulnerability could coexist with confidence. At a time when women were often reduced to symbols, she insisted on being a full human being. Her influence extended quietly into the next generation of performers. Many actresses who came after her saw in Goldie a blueprint for survival, not just how to succeed, but how to endure. She modeled a career that did not burn itself out chasing relevance. She showed that stepping back could be an act of strength, that choosing family and mental health over constant exposure did not erase your legacy, but deepened it. Even as the world changed and Hollywood evolved, Goldie remained relevant not because she chased trends, but because she represented timeless truths. Fear is universal. Growth is painful. Joy is possible, but never permanent. Life is fragile, and that fragility is what makes it meaningful. These ideas, woven through her story, resonate far beyond film. They speak to anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by their own thoughts, anyone who has smiled through pain, and anyone who has survived themselves. Goldie Hawn's life also challenges the idea that success heals everything. Her story reminds us that achievements do not erase inner struggles, and that untreated fear can follow us even into our greatest victories. But it also offers hope, the hope that awareness can transform suffering into wisdom, that self-understanding can soften even the deepest anxieties, and that it is never too late to learn how to be kind to yourself. As she continues to live her life away from constant attention, Goldie embodies a rare form of legacy, one built not on immortality, but on impact. She does not need to be everywhere to be remembered. Her work, her words, and her example continue to echo quietly through culture, through conversations about mental health, aging, and authenticity. In the end, Goldie Hawn's story is not about escaping fear. It is about learning how to live alongside it without letting it take control. It is about choosing awareness over denial, love over image, and meaning over noise. It is the story of a woman who turned her darkest moments into a source of light for others, who transformed private pain into public compassion. This is why her story matters. This is why her life endures. Because long after the laughter fades and the screen goes dark, what remains is not the image of a star, but the truth of a human being who learned how to survive, how to grow, and how to live with open eyes and an open heart. With every passing year, Goldie Hawn's life began to feel less like a story being written and more like a memory being lived inside, carefully and deliberately. She became deeply aware of time, not as something to fear, but as something to respect. The panic that once made her afraid of each heartbeat slowly transformed into gratitude for each breath. Where there was once urgency, there was now patience. Where there was once fear of losing control, there was now trust in the natural unfolding of life. Goldie often reflected on how memory shapes identity, how the mind revisits pain long after danger has passed, and how healing does not mean forgetting. She understood that the past never truly disappears. It becomes part of the present, quietly influencing choices, reactions, and beliefs. Instead of trying to erase her painful memories, she chose to sit with them, to acknowledge their role in shaping her strength. This acceptance gave her a sense of wholeness that fame alone could never provide. As she moved through her later years, Goldie became increasingly protective of her energy. She chose her words carefully, her appearances selectively, and her relationships intentionally. She was no longer interested in being admired by everyone. She valued being understood by a few. This shift marked a profound change from her early years, when approval felt like survival. Now, self-respect replaced external validation. Her conversations often turned toward meaning what makes a life worthwhile when applause fades. She believed that meaning came from connection, from presence, from kindness practiced daily, rather than promised publicly. These beliefs were not philosophical luxuries. They were survival tools she had forged during years of anxiety and emotional turbulence. She had learned that without inner awareness, success becomes hollow, and without compassion, power becomes isolating. She forgave the industry for its cruelty, the past for its pain, and herself for the moments when fear dictated her choices. This forgiveness did not erase consequences, but it released her from the burden of resentment. It allowed her to move forward without dragging old wounds into new days. Her presence in public spaces carried a different kind of authority now, not the authority of fame, but the authority of lived experience. When she spoke, people listened not because she was a movie star, but because her words came from truth. She did not glamorize suffering, nor did she minimize it. She spoke plainly about fear, aging, uncertainty, and love, reminding others that none of these experiences disqualifies a person from happiness. In quiet moments, Goldie found joy in simplicity. Morning sunlight, shared laughter, silence without anxiety. These moments, once impossible during her most anxious years, became her greatest treasures. She understood that peace is not loud. It does not announce itself. It arrives gently when the mind learns to stop fighting itself. And Goldie Hawn's journey through time teaches a rare lesson that healing is not a straight line, that fear may return in different forms, and that growth often happens quietly, away from applause. Her life shows that it is possible to carry past pain without letting it dominate the present, and that wisdom is not about having fewer problems, but about responding to them with understanding rather than panic. As the storm of her early life settled into calmer waters, Goldie did not forget the darkness she once lived with. She carried it carefully, using it as a compass rather than a weight. It guided her toward empathy, patience, and humility. It reminded her to listen more than speak, to feel more than perform, and to live more than prove. This phase of her life is not dramatic, but it is profound. It is the quiet after survival, the calm that comes not from luck but from effort. It is the part of the story that rarely makes headlines, yet defines everything that came before. And in this quiet, Goldie Hawn continues not chasing legacy, but living it. As the world continued to change, growing louder, faster, and more restless, Goldie Hawn remained a steady echo of something gentler, something many felt they had lost, but could not name. She did not resist the future, yet she refused to let it erase the past. Her life became a bridge between generations, connecting those who remembered her early laughter with those discovering her wisdom later in life. In this way, her story never stopped evolving, it simply changed its tone. Goldie understood that legacy is not something declared, but something noticed. It appears in the way people speak your name when you are not in the room. It lives in the courage others find after hearing your truth. Her openness about anxiety, fear, and inner struggle created space for conversations that once felt forbidden. Long before mental health became a global discussion, she was quietly planting seeds of honesty. Those seeds grew into understanding, empathy, and acceptance far beyond her own life. She watched the world with curiosity rather than judgment. She saw younger generations fighting battles she recognized: pressure, comparison, exhaustion, fear of not being enough. Instead of criticizing, she listened. Instead of offering perfection, she offered perspective. She reminded people that the mind is powerful, but it must be guided with kindness. She reminded them that success without self-awareness can become a prison, and that stillness is not failure, but wisdom. Her influence on women, especially, carried a deep emotional weight. Goldie challenged the idea that women must choose between strength and softness, between ambition and compassion. She lived as proof that humor can be profound, that beauty can coexist with intelligence, and that aging can deepen rather than diminish presence. She refused to disappear quietly, yet she also refused to fight time as an enemy. This balance became one of her greatest lessons. Goldie's story also reshaped how people viewed joy. For her, joy was not constant laughter or endless positivity, it was resilience. It was the ability to return to light after darkness. It was the courage to feel deeply without fear of breaking. Her laughter, once seen as effortless, revealed itself as something far more meaningful, a sound forged through survival, understanding, and choice. As years passed, she became more reflective, often speaking about gratitude not as politeness, but as grounding. Gratitude, for her, was the awareness that life continues despite uncertainty, that love remains despite imperfection, and that peace can be found even after long battles with fear. This gratitude softened her voice, but strengthened her message. Goldie Hawn's life stands as a reminder that the most powerful transformations happen internally. Fame may open doors, but self-awareness opens peace. Applause may celebrate achievement, but understanding sustains the soul. Her journey teaches that healing does not require forgetting who you were, only learning how to carry that person with compassion. When the cameras fade and the interviews end, what remains is not an image frozen in time, but a presence that continues to resonate. Goldie Hawn does not need to speak loudly to be heard. Her story lives on in the quiet moments when someone chooses mindfulness over panic, honesty over performance, love over fear. This is the echo she leaves behind. Not noise, but meaning. Not spectacle, but truth. And in that truth, her story continues to guide, to comfort, and to remind us that even the brightest laughter can come from the deepest understanding. As Goldie Hawn moved further into the later chapters of her life, she became living proof that impact does not require constant motion. She no longer chased moments. She allowed moments to arrive. The woman who once felt chased by her own thoughts learned how to sit peacefully inside them. Silence, once terrifying, became comforting. Stillness, once impossible, became sacred. She often reflected on how fear once convinced her that something was wrong with her, when in truth, fear was simply asking to be understood. This realization reshaped her entire worldview. She came to see anxiety not as an enemy, but as a messenger, one that arrived when life demanded attention, balance, or compassion. This understanding changed how she responded to herself and others. Judgment softened, patience grew, empathy deepened. Goldie's presence in conversations about mental health carried a unique weight because it was never clinical or distant. She spoke as someone who had lived inside the storm, who knew what it felt like to lose trust in her own body, to feel hijacked by panic without warning. She never minimized the pain. She never dramatized it either. She spoke with honesty, grounding her words in lived reality rather than theory. This honesty made people feel less alone. Her life also demonstrated that healing does not mean the end of struggle. It means learning how to respond differently when struggle returns. Goldie acknowledged that fear sometimes revisits, especially in moments of uncertainty or loss, but she no longer feared fear itself. She had learned that she could survive it, breathe through it, and allow it to pass without believing it defined her future. As a mother and grandmother, she carried this wisdom into her family. She modeled emotional awareness not through lectures, but through presence. She listened. She asked questions. She created space for feelings rather than dismissing them. In doing so, she passed down something more valuable than fame: emotional safety. Her family did not inherit perfection. They inherited understanding. Goldie's approach to life gradually became more spiritual, though never rigid or dogmatic. She believed in awareness, in energy, in the idea that how we think shapes how we live. She believed that kindness toward the self was the foundation of kindness toward others. This belief guided her daily choices, from how she spent her time to how she engaged with the world. She also understood loss in a deeper way. As years passed, she witnessed friends, colleagues, and loved ones age, struggle, and disappear. Each loss reminded her of impermanence. Yet instead of hardening her, it made her more tender. She valued connection more deeply, choosing depth over breadth, truth over performance. She learned that love does not require possession, only presence. Goldie Hawn's story reminds us that the most meaningful lives are not always the loudest. Sometimes the greatest impact comes from consistency, integrity, and quiet courage. She did not reinvent herself to stay visible. She revealed herself more fully to stay honest. This choice gave her life a depth that fame alone could never achieve. In a world obsessed with doing more, Goldie taught the power of being present, being aware, being gentle with oneself. Her journey from fear to understanding, from panic to peace, offers a roadmap for anyone who has ever felt overwhelmed by their own mind. And so her story continues, not as a headline, but as a lesson carried forward, a reminder that healing is possible, that fear is not failure, and that a life lived with awareness can become a quiet gift to the world, even without applause. As Goldie Hawn continued to move through life, one truth became increasingly clear. She was never interested in being remembered as flawless. She wanted to be remembered as real. In a culture that constantly edits, filters, and polishes every visible moment, her refusal to pretend became an act of quiet courage. She allowed herself to be seen not as an idea, but as a person shaped by fear, resilience, laughter, and time. Goldie understood that authenticity often comes at a cost. Being honest about anxiety meant risking misunderstanding. Speaking openly about mental health meant stepping outside the carefully controlled image Hollywood prefers. Yet she accepted that cost willingly. She knew that pretending had nearly destroyed her once. She would not let it happen again. This choice deepened her sense of self-respect and strengthened her connection to others who recognized their own struggles in her story. Her relationship with fame evolved into something almost observational. She watched it from a distance, aware of its power and its emptiness. She no longer measured her worth by attention or relevance. Instead, she measured it by peace, by connection, by the ability to wake up without fear dominating her thoughts. This shift did not come easily. It was earned through years of inner work, reflection, and deliberate living. Goldie often spoke about how fear narrows life, shrinking possibility and joy. She believed that awareness expands life, creating space for curiosity, compassion, and growth. This belief shaped how she approached each new day. She did not rush. She did not compete. She listened more than she spoke. She allowed herself to feel without judgment. These small choices added up to a life lived with intention rather than reaction. She also recognized the importance of humor, not as escape, but as balance. Laughter remained part of her identity, not because she needed to entertain, but because joy was something she consciously chose. Her humor softened difficult conversations, opened doors to honesty, and reminded people that seriousness does not require heaviness. Through laughter, she showed that healing can be gentle. She did not wish away the fear or the pain because she understood their role in shaping her depth. She believed that every difficult moment carried a lesson, even if it took years to understand it. This perspective allowed her to honor her younger self rather than judge her. It allowed her to see survival not as weakness but as strength in its rawest form. Her life also demonstrated the power of choice to pause instead of push, choice to speak instead of hide, choice to live fully even when certainty is impossible. These choices defined her far more than any role she ever played. They created a legacy rooted not in performance but in presence. Goldie Hawn's journey invites reflection. It asks us to consider how we respond to our own fears, how we define success, and how we measure a life well lived. It challenges the belief that happiness is effortless or permanent. It does not promise perfection. It offers permission to be human, to struggle, to grow, and to choose kindness toward oneself. This is the enduring strength of Goldie Hawn, not the brightness of her fame, but the depth of her truth. As Goldie Hawn moved deeper into the later seasons of her life, her days became less about momentum and more about meaning. The urgency that once defined her early years had softened into awareness. She no longer felt chased by time. Instead, she walked alongside it, understanding that every moment carried value simply by existing. This shift was not accidental. It was the result of decades spent listening inward, learning how to live without constantly proving her worth. Goldie began to speak more about presence, about how often people miss their own lives while worrying about what comes next. She understood this better than most, having once lived inside a mind that raced endlessly toward imagined dangers. Now, she practiced returning to the present moment again and again, especially when old anxieties tried to resurface. This practice did not erase discomfort, but it changed her relationship with it. She no longer believed every fearful thought. She observed them, allowed them, and let them pass. Her understanding of happiness continued to evolve. Happiness, she believed, was not excitement or success, but alignment, the feeling that your outer life and inner values are no longer at war. This alignment allowed her to experience joy in simplicity, to appreciate quiet mornings, shared meals, and moments of genuine connection. These were the moments that once felt unreachable, the moments anxiety had stolen from her youth. Now, they returned gently, without demand. Goldie's voice, when she chose to speak publicly, carried a calm authority. She did not instruct, she reflected. She shared what she had learned, not as universal truth, but as personal understanding. This humility made her message powerful. People trusted her because she never claimed mastery over life. She only claimed commitment to awareness. In conversations about fear, she emphasized compassion over control. She believed that fighting fear often made it stronger, while listening to it with kindness weakened its grip. Jenny. This idea resonated deeply with those who had spent years battling their own minds. Through her words, many learned that healing does not require force, it requires patience. Goldie also became more intentional about gratitude, not as a ritual, but as a perspective. Gratitude, for her, meant recognizing what remains even when life changes. It meant appreciating love that evolves, purpose that shifts, and identity that deepens rather than disappears. This perspective allowed her to face aging without bitterness. She saw it as a continuation, not a loss. Her life during this time reflected balance. She stayed connected to family, remained curious about the world, and continued to learn. She did not isolate herself from modern life, nor did she surrender to its chaos. She found a middle ground, engaged but not consumed. This balance became one of her quiet achievements, something far more difficult than fame. Goldie Hawn's story at this stage is not marked by dramatic events, but by steadiness. It is the story of someone who survived her own storms and chose not to forget them, but to use them as guides. She carried her past with respect, her present with awareness, and her future without fear. In this steadiness, her influence continued, not through spectacle, but through example, not through noise, but through consistency. She showed that a life does not have to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It only has to be honest. And so, Goldie Hawn continues breathing, living, and teaching without teaching. Her story remains open, not because it lacks conclusion, but because a life lived with awareness never truly ends. As Goldie Hawn continued her journey, one of the most striking qualities about her life was how she chose softness in a world that constantly rewarded hardness. She did not confuse strength with silence or power with control. Instead, she allowed tenderness to exist alongside resilience, proving that surviving does not require becoming cold. This choice, repeated over decades, shaped the way she moved through the world and the way the world slowly learned to see her. Goldie often reflected on how fear had once hardened her thoughts, making her guard every feeling, every expectation, every outcome. Over time, she realized that protection built on fear only creates more isolation. True safety, she learned, comes from openness, from the willingness to feel deeply, even when there are no guarantees. This realization changed how she loved, how she parented, and how she related to herself. Her relationship with her inner voice evolved dramatically. In her youth, that voice was critical, demanding, and often cruel. It questioned her worth, predicted disaster, and magnified uncertainty. Through years of mindfulness and self-observation, she learned to soften that voice. She replaced judgment with curiosity, impatience with understanding. This internal shift was quiet, invisible to the world, yet it transformed everything. Goldie's story challenges the idea that healing must look dramatic or decisive. Her healing unfolded slowly through countless small moments of awareness, a breath taken during panic, a pause before reacting, a choice to rest instead of push. These moments, insignificant on their own, accumulated into peace. She learned that the nervous system remembers kindness just as deeply as it remembers fear. As she aged, Goldie became increasingly aware of how rare it is to remain emotionally open in a world that often punishes vulnerability. She refused to armor herself against life. She allowed grief when it arrived. She allowed joy without suspicion. She allowed uncertainty without panic. This emotional openness did not make her fragile. It made her grounded. Her conversations about life grew more poetic, shaped by experience rather than theory. She spoke of balance as something living, something that shifts daily. She believed that listening to oneself is an ongoing practice, not a destination. This belief freed her from the pressure to arrive at happiness. She understood that contentment is not fixed, it flows. Goldie's presence continued to offer comfort to those navigating their own inner storms. Without preaching, she normalized struggle. Without minimizing pain, she offered hope. Her life became a mirror in which others could see their own fears reflected without shame. This is a rare form of influence, one rooted not in authority, but in empathy. She also recognized the importance of rest, something she had once denied herself. This respect for rest became part of her philosophy, reminding others that exhaustion is not a badge of honor and that slowing down can be an act of self-respect. Goldie Hawn's journey shows that staying soft is not weakness, it is discipline. It requires courage to remain open after fear, to remain kind after pain, to remain hopeful after disappointment. Her life stands as evidence that gentleness can coexist with endurance and that compassion can be a form of strength. As her story continues to unfold quietly, Goldie remains an example of how to live fully without becoming hardened by the world. She reminds us that survival does not require sacrifice of the self and that the most profound victories are often internal, unseen, and deeply human. As Goldie Hawn moved forward, she came to understand something that once felt impossible to her younger self, that peace is not something the world gives you, but something you slowly learn to protect. After years of anxiety, pressure, and emotional survival, she no longer searched for validation outside herself. She had learned that applause fades, roles end, and attention shifts, but inner balance is something you must choose again and again. She often spoke about how easily people confuse movement with meaning. In her early life, she believed she had to keep going, keep achieving, keep smiling, just to stay safe. Slowing down once felt dangerous, as if everything might collapse if she stopped. Now, she understood the opposite. Stillness did not threaten her life, it sustained it. By allowing herself to pause, she found clarity where chaos once lived. Goldie's understanding of fear matured into wisdom. Fear no longer felt like an enemy hiding in the dark. It became a familiar signal, one she could listen to without obeying. She learned that fear often arrives when the mind is trying to protect itself, even if it does so imperfectly. This awareness softened her reactions and deepened her compassion toward herself and others. Her public image, once defined by brightness and humor alone, now carried depth. People saw her not only as an entertainer, but as a woman who had walked through psychological fire and emerged with insight rather than bitterness. This depth gave her words a gravity that could not be manufactured. When she spoke about mindfulness, resilience, or emotional awareness, it came from lived truth, not trends. Goldie's life also highlighted the importance of choice in shaping emotional health. She chose how much of the world to let in. She chose what kind of conversations to engage in. She chose to protect her mental space from constant stimulation and negativity. These choices were acts of self-respect, learned through years of knowing what it feels like to be overwhelmed. As she aged, she found freedom in letting go of expectations placed on her by the industry, by society, and even by herself. She no longer felt responsible for maintaining an image. She allowed herself to be fluid, to change her mind, to grow in directions that felt right rather than impressive. This freedom brought lightness back into her life, a quiet joy that did not depend on external approval. Goldie's story also speaks to the power of awareness in everyday life. She believed that small moments of presence could shift entire days, and that kindness toward oneself could ripple outward in unseen ways. She lived this belief not through grand gestures, but through daily practice, listening, breathing, noticing. These practices, once foreign to her anxious mind, became anchors. Her journey reminds us that healing does not erase the past, it integrates it. Goldie did not become someone else. She became more fully herself, carrying her history with respect rather than shame. The fear that once defined her did not disappear. It lost its authority. In this stage of her life, Goldie Hawn stands not as a symbol of perfection, but as proof that peace is possible after long struggle. She shows that growth can be gentle, that strength can be quiet, and that the greatest achievement is not fame, but the ability to live comfortably within your own mind. And so, her story continues, not with dramatic twists, but with steady truth, a life shaped by awareness, a legacy rooted in humanity, a reminder that even after the storm, it is possible to learn how to breathe freely again. There comes a moment in every long life when the story no longer needs to move forward to feel complete. Not because everything has ended, but because everything that needed to be understood has finally found its place. For Goldie Hawn, That moment did not arrive with an award, a farewell performance, or a final public appearance. It arrived quietly, through acceptance, through peace, through the rare understanding that survival itself can be a form of victory. Goldie Hawn's life was never a straight line. It curved through fear, rose through laughter, bent under pressure, and softened with wisdom. She lived through an era that demanded perfection while offering very little compassion, especially to women who dared to admit they were struggling. She carried anxiety at a time when there were no safe words for it, no public conversations, no shared understanding, and yet she endured, not by hiding forever, but by learning how to face herself honestly. She taught the world something subtle but powerful, that a smiling face can hold a heavy heart, and that acknowledging pain does not diminish joy, it deepens it. Her laughter was never empty, it was layered. It carried memory, survival, and choice. Each time she laughed, it was not because life was easy, but because she refused to let fear take everything from her. Goldie Hawn lived in the United States, became famous as an actress, producer, and cultural figure, but what truly made her unforgettable was not the country she lived in or the films she made, it was the emotional truth she carried into public view. She showed that it is possible to be admired without being armored, to be successful without being consumed, to be visible without being lost. She never needed a tragic ending to become meaningful. Her story proves that you do not have to disappear, fall, or die to leave a legacy. Some legacies are built through living, through staying, through choosing awareness over avoidance, through remaining gentle in a world that often rewards hardness. Goldie's greatest danger was never an accident, a scandal, or a public downfall. Her greatest danger was internal, the fear that once told her she might not survive herself. And yet, she did. She learned. She adapted. She transformed that danger into understanding, and that understanding into purpose. As time continues and generations shift, her story will not age the way trends do. It will remain relevant because fear remains human and healing remains necessary. Somewhere, someone struggling with anxiety will hear her words and feel less broken. Somewhere, someone aging will see her face and feel less afraid of time. Somewhere, someone will realize that peace is not given, it is practiced. This is where the story rests, not with an ending, but with a breath taken without panic, a breath taken with awareness, a breath taken by someone who once feared she could not breathe at all. Goldie Hawn's life reminds us that legends are not only those who shine the brightest, but those who learn how to live fully after the light dims. And in that quiet space beyond fame, beyond fear, beyond performance, her legacy remains. Not loud, not dramatic, but deeply, unmistakably human.